Welcome to the third episode of the first series of the Women in CX Talk Trends podcast, a new series dedicated to bringing you the latest news and insights from female leaders in CX and technology. On a mission to ensure women are at the centre of important industry conversations, join me, Claire Muscat, and my inspiring guests as we debate the hottest topics and explore current trends, helping you to stay ahead of the curve of the latest developments shaping customer, employee, and women's workplace experiences. In today's episode, sponsored by CoreMiner, I'll be chatting with Anne Dawson, Senior Manager, Employee Development and Training, about the question, how can women in CX and EX take control of their career development in a time where traditional mentorship and sponsorship programs are on the decline? We'll explore how women can build a personal board of directors, expand their mentorship networks beyond their own organisations, and foster cross-functional collaboration. We'll also discuss the importance of sponsorship, the role male allies can play in driving meaningful change, and how women in leadership can lift others up as we all rise together. Hi, Anne. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Well, welcome to the Women in CX Talk Trends podcast.
Thank you.
And welcome to everybody who's listening or watching wherever you are as well. And as we always do with Women in CX, let's just dive straight into the conversation today. And I'm sure our audience would love to know a little bit more about you. So if you could give us a little introduction and tell us what brought you to your current role at CoreMiner, that would be a great way to start.
Absolutely. So I started my career in corporate America, or in the corporate world, back in the late 90s, and I started it in the telco industry, right? I worked for a local telephone company for many years, and that's really where my passion for training and teaching came about. So I worked in contact centers, and I was a rep on the phone and customer service type contact centers for many, many years. And the company I worked for was actually a union shop, so it was unionized, and my roles were always represented by the union. And when they would move the work, because that's what unionized shops do, they would pick me to be the person that got to travel from contact center to contact center all around our 14-state area to train the new employees on how to do the work that we were doing in the contact center that I was at. And I loved it. Like, I absolutely loved it. So that's what led me to get my bachelor's degree in communications, and then eventually a master's in organizational management with an emphasis in training. And about 15 years ago, in 2010, I grew up, like I said, in the Midwest. I realized I never want to live somewhere where it snows again. I'm not a cold weather person. So I relocated to sunny Florida, and that's how I came about working at CoreMiner. I started working at CoreMiner as the corporate trainer. So I was actually the person that flew out and trained our customers on our product. And I did that for several years, really loved that. Eventually became the manager of that training team. I managed training the professional services group, but that desire and that passion for employee training never went away. And so I really started to campaign about 5 years ago for us to have a training department that just focused on the employee experience and the training of employees. And that campaign was successful with a lot of help from a lot of mentors, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I became the permanent manager of this department, which is the Employee Development and Training Department at CoreMiner. And that's how I got here.
That's such a great story. And that red thread has always been there. And awesome to hear how you campaigned on it. I definitely can't wait to hear more about how you made those steps. So today specifically, we're going to be talking about mentorship, sponsorship, and collaboration. So I think my first question would have to be, why do you think these are such crucial topics for women in CX and EX right now?
So my first thought immediately goes to the political climate, right? That we've seen this huge pullback of diversity type programs across different areas internationally. But honestly, I feel like this all kind of started during COVID, right? When we started to see these reductions in workforces, the diversity type roles, the employee engagement type roles, those were the ones that started to get eliminated from organizations. Because let's be honest, they're luxury type jobs, right? When you're a small startup and you're trying to formulate a staff, you're going to get your cut and dry HR team, you're going to get your salespeople, you're going to get your customer success people. But these types of employee support roles to help with your workforce, those come along later as you grow and mature as an organization. So when it's time to cut jobs, those are always the first to go, I've noticed. So I really started to see a reduction in those type of efforts back then. And then, like I said, these current political climate makes it even worse. And my first reaction, I don't know about yours, but my first reaction was panic, right? Like, oh no, we're going backwards, right? But I have had to really remind myself lately that we're just going back to our roots. And what I mean by that is when I started out in the corporate world, I don't know about yourself, but when I started out in the corporate world, there were not a lot of organizations or communities or groups within the companies that I worked for that focused on helping women, helping minorities, helping underrepresented groups get representation within the organization. So as far as getting help and assistance from women, that was something that was a grassroots effort within all of the organizations that I worked for, right? It was women helping women and women grabbing women along the way and being like, come with me, I can help you. And so I feel like we're just going to have to return to that. And so I feel like we need to get a little bit more exposure into that. Like, we can do this, we've done it, and this is how we do it.
Yeah, there's probably a lot I could say about that. But yeah, I think it's challenging, isn't it? Because I think it's less about the DEI programs and more about the rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion more broadly. So I agree with you. Like, the grassroots stuff is highly valuable, but a lot of the checks and balances that came with DEI policy, law, legislation was a guardrail, I guess, to ensuring, for example, when a leadership role came up for recruitment, that there was a diverse set of potential
applicants in
the first place. And like, love anonymized, gender taken out of the equation interview processes to ensure that bias can't happen. Because I don't think people go to work thinking, right, I'm going to oppress any particular marginalized or minority group, but so much of bias is unconscious, isn't it? So I think for me, I am really concerned and fab that we have built momentum and culture as women to be able to do that for one another, but I'm also afraid of what the kind of open challenge to diversity, equity, and inclusion might do in the workplace as well. Because if it's not protected the way that it is today, does that mean the people who maybe do come to work with not subconscious but very conscious biases could negatively affect women and minority groups significantly in the coming years? But yeah, that is a trend that we're seeing, isn't it? We get to see it play out. But
it's scary. It's definitely scary.
Yeah, scary is a good word to describe it. But I suppose one of the ways that we can ensure women continue to rise up and occupy positions of leadership is about how we build our communities around ourselves, isn't it? So I thought it'd be great to move on to now talk about what it's like to build a personal board of directors for yourself. I know that was a word that you'd used, so I just wondered if you could explain for our audience a little bit more about what it is and how this personal board of directors can differ from traditional mentorship.
Absolutely. So the concept of the board of directors was introduced to me by another member of the community, Renee Foken. I think that's how I pronounce her last name properly. I went and attended your unconference that you held in Dallas last year. It was a phenomenal event. So if you get the opportunity to attend, folks listening, absolutely sign up and attend for the one that they're going to hold this year. But there were a lot of collaboration sessions, as you know, and she attended a lot of the same collaboration sessions that I did. And she even mentioned in one of them, like, ladies, let me ask you all a question. She said, do each of you have a personal board of directors? And that really piqued my interest. I'm like, what is that? And she's like, a group of like mentors and people that you go to for advice and suggestions, just like a company has a board of directors that helps them determine, their their path and their way forward, you as an individual should have that for yourself in your career. And I just absolutely loved that idea. And she talked about how you need it from different areas of your life, right? It shouldn't just be people within your own company to help you advance within your own organization. It needs to be people from your personal life and people maybe in your industry, but not in your company. And that's where I realized I was really lacking. Like, I have a ton of mentors at my own organization. I have mentors in the other realms of, my personal and social life, but I didn't really have anybody that was familiar with my industry but did not work in my organization. So I actually touched base with Serena Riley from Conversite AI. And I asked her, I actually went up to her at the end of the conference and said, hey, I love this idea of the personal board of directors. I'd love for you to be on mine. Would you be willing for us to connect? And she was like, absolutely. We shared information and we've been connecting, and we meet once a month, right? We have a Zoom call and we just kind of catch up on how we're doing. And I really respect and admire her career. So she's a mentor to me in that way. But we also kind of, like, I believe to a certain degree, kind of co-mentor each other because we have a lot of the same things in common. We both have a huge respect for work-life balance. So we connect really well on that and all of those types of things. So I think the major difference is, whereas traditional mentorship is usually found within your own immediate, like, work company, the board of directors is a more well-rounded approach to mentorship, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense to me. I was just thinking, who's on my personal board of directors? Yeah, I think similar examples professionally, but I think I'd probably also include my therapist.
Yeah, absolutely.
My personal trainer and my coach in that as well.
Yeah.
So people I know I can turn to,
right,
for very different needs. If I need to make decisions or I want to make progress in an area of my life, particularly to do with health and well-being, like I think that would just be my addition to it. Like, sometimes for professionals to be part of your board of directors is also really advantageous. But I do love that. And yeah, huge shout out to both Renee and Serena, absolutely incredible women. And yeah, I'm so glad the community have put you guys together.
Yeah, absolutely, me too.
So thinking about the importance of women role models and mentors specifically, got some data here for us, and that's according to the most recent Women in the Workplace report in 2022, which is a little while ago, but still the most recent one. 48% of companies offered career advancement programs with content tailored for women. By 2024, that number had dropped to just 37%. Yeah. The decline is even steeper for women of colour, falling from an already low 25% in 2022 to just 15% today. That's the signal, isn't it? Because it's these kinds of programs haven't just disappeared overnight. It's been happening since the pandemic and gradually retreating for quite some time. So my question here is, how can women in leadership positions be more intentional about lifting others up? I'm sure you've got some great examples, because I know the women at Coal Miner are incredible at this.
They are. So number one, I feel like we, as women in leadership in any kind of position, you have a responsibility to pay it forward, right? One of my favorite sayings that I've gotten from like spiritual advisors is, you got to give it away to keep it, no matter what that is, whether it's, love or happiness or wealth, and your career is the same. You got to give away the experience that you have in order to keep it. And I believe, like I said, we have a responsibility to do that. I have been so fortunate that so many women along the way in my career have grabbed me and assisted me. I've got a couple of different examples that I can show you. And so I feel like I have that responsibility as well. And as you said, the women that I work with at Coal Miner, they're all very intentional about this too. We have an employee resource group here at Coal Miner for women specifically. It's called the Women and Employee Resource Group here at Coal Miner. We get together once a month. Jill is kind of our admin of that group. She really mediates and does all the administration and scheduling of it. She's fantastic at it. But all the women that from the community, Loretta, Alex, a bunch of those women all participate and attend. And it doesn't need to be formalized. I feel like even during those conversations, every single one of the women has at some point in time spoken up to the other women in the call and said, hey, if any of you ever need to talk to somebody about anything, no matter how minuscule you may think it is, I'm here. Here's my phone number. Here's my cell phone. Here's, you don't have to just do it in the realm of the work hours. You can reach out to me outside of work. I'm here to help you. I'm here to offer advice or offer my experience. And like I said, pay that forward. So the two examples that I have from my own personal career was, number one of the times that I was sent out of state to do a training at the phone company, the person who ran the entire call center in that area was a woman. And she made it a point to come up to me and say, what are you doing tonight? I'm taking you to dinner. And we and her went out to dinner. And here I was, this little level entry 20-year-old entry level employee. And here was this director that was running this, multi-thousand employee call center, took me to dinner. And it was simply to be like, what are your career? I mean, I didn't come to her. She came to me, and it was simply like offering up her mentorship. Like, what are you trying to do with your career here? Where do you want to go with this company? Because I can help you. What do you need my help with? And, she's like, I see something in you. And I loved that. I was so grateful for that, because I wouldn't have had the courage to go up to her by any means. Right. And then years later, after I got my degree and I was pursuing the employee training side of things at the phone company, I had a very candid conversation with one of the leaders of HR there. It was another woman. And I told her, hey, this is what I want, and this is what I'm trying to do. And she took a chance of being very honest with me. And she said, look, this company has gone from 70,000 employees to 35,000 employees in 5 years. Right? We are a union represented company, which means anytime you apply for a position, it is always going to boil down to who has the most seniority. It has nothing to do with your skill set. It has nothing to do with your performance. It's always seniority. At that point in time, I had been at the company for 10 years. But because of all the reductions in workforce and everything, again, was based on seniority, I had very low seniority, even as a 10-year employee. So she said, I'm going to be completely honest with you. You will never get the opportunity to work in this field at this company. And if you really want to pursue this, you are going to need to leave us. And I was like, even after you guys spent all this money to send me to school? She's like, yes, we hate to see it, but I'm being honest with you. And I'm telling you that if this is what you want to do with your career, you are going to have to leave. And that level of being that candid and honest with me, I was so appreciative of it, because it's what gave me the push out the door and moved me to Florida and got me in with CallMiner. But again, I've tried to take that to heart and pay it forward. Any women that I mentor, I try to be very honest and candid with. Any of the women I've managed, I've tried to always be very honest and candid with them as well.
Yeah, no, that radical transparency is so important, isn't it? And to keep somebody in your workforce because you don't want to lose them, even though that's not going to be the best thing for them. That's definitely happened to me before. I've been promised something that was, when I, after a couple of years, realised that it's just not going to be achievable within the next 5 years. And I don't have 5 years. I want to, be moving up now. So that's a really, really good example. But yeah, there's lots of different ways of calling it, isn't it? Like sending the elevator back down, or giving a hand to the person behind you on the ladder. I think it is critically important, and it is about being intentional. And yeah, I think for me as well, when it comes to diversity, that's really important as well. So not just supporting and lifting up people who remind you of you, but also women who are different, and women and men as well. I think two of my best examples of people whose careers I supported from that kind of giving them the first big opportunity, I'd spotted their talent. They were both actually guys, but they've also gone on to pay it forward as well. And I think you have to kind of see and feel the power of that, don't you, sometimes, to be able to pay it forward yourself, because you know what it felt like to have that woman early in your career be like, I see something in you, like, come on, let's go for dinner. Those moments are unforgettable, aren't they? And they really do shape your career. So looking for those moments, those opportunities to how can we be that person for someone else, even if we didn't experience it ourselves. So yeah, I really love that one.
Well, and understanding that, like, you need to be your own advocate and being able to share that advice with other women and even men that I've managed. For instance, it took me years of working in the corporate world to understand that companies only pay you what you ask for, right? And if you think, I was so naive and so young when I entered the workforce, I thought like, well, if I get in the door and I work really hard, they're gonna, realize it, and then they're just gonna start handing me money. And that's that's, as you know, not how it works. So I had to learn, like, up front, when you interview, you need to, if this is how much money you want, you need to ask for that right up front and not waste anybody's time. And so again, over the years, the people that I've mentored, the people that I've managed, I've always tried to pass that, men and women, I've tried to pass that information around. Like, don't, for lack of a better term, don't pussyfoot around the subject of money. If you need a certain amount of money, state it and be very candid and upfront about it.
Yeah. Or even state 20% higher than you actually need.
Yes.
So you get knocked down.
Give yourself the negotiation room. You got it. Love it.
Yeah. I remember somebody teaching me that one. And I've definitely passed that on to pretty much every single woman that I've met that's considering that. Mm-hmm. Ask for what you worth plus 20%.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
Yeah. So I suppose, finding mentors can be a bit of a challenge. I thought you gave some really great examples from where you found yours beyond your organisation. But if you were to give any advice to women who are in that position and they were trying to find someone who really understands their challenges, what would you tell them?
I would say look outside of your company, right? So take advantage of things like communities. Women in CX is a perfect one. As you heard me say, I've found several mentors and people to be on my board through this organization. So different communities that are out there. Also, social groups that you might be involved in. Like I said, it's your board of directors and your mentors don't necessarily only have to be from a career aspect, right? Like, we all want to have a well-rounded group. So as you mentioned, you've got, your therapist, you've got your personal trainer. I love all those examples because that's true, right? I have a spiritual advisor. If you belong to a church, go find somebody in your church. If you're in the PTA, maybe find somebody in the PTA, whatever your gym, right? Find whatever you're interested in, and whatever, when you see a quality in another woman that you admire, don't be shy to go up and be like, hey, I love this, and I would love your advice on this because I would like to get better at that, right?
Yeah, that's a really lovely way to describe it. I was thinking, maybe mine's less of a personal board of directors and more of like a personal advisory board. Quite often I'm looking for like expertise that I don't have. So I think, sometimes finding mentors that are very different to you or from different industries or different subject matter experts, but are proven leaders, can be really powerful because they're not as emotionally attached to the technical subject matter as you are sometimes, and can ask you better questions about, well, why is that, or like, well, how does that work, that makes you think about it, because it isn't just an automatic assumption. So
so to your point too, we got like the pay it forward, or like I said, you got to give it away to keep it, but that's assuming that you have the information or the experience in the first place. So to your point, we can't transmit something we haven't got. And so a lot of times, like, my mentors are giving me advice on experiences that I have zero experience in, and that's why I need the help.
I was thinking as well, like, when sometimes we think mentors have to be, I don't know, like CEOs or very senior directors. They have to have done everything. But for me, I think finding someone who's just a few steps ahead of you is also really powerful, particularly when you're trying to figure something out, or even somebody who's been through an experience that you haven't yet. So, I'm always connecting women with one another. Let's say if they're going through career transition, redundancy, it might not be, it might be not like a long-term mentorship relationship that you need. You just need some people to give you the lowdown on how they navigated a challenge, or how they dealt with it, and being able to find them in a shorter term. So back to some more statistics, and I think we've mentioned the guys, but I think we should dive into that a little bit more. I've got some more statistics. So from the 2018 Women in the Workplace study by Lean In Org and McKinsey & Company, it revealed that only 54% of women have sponsors compared to 63% of men. The 2024 figures show that less than 1 in 4 companies has a formal sponsorship program. So just to help the audience understand a little bit more about the differences, we often hear about mentorship, but less about sponsorship. But sponsorship, I believe, is more important probably to career progression than mentorship. So to help everybody just get their heads around two words that sound like they might do a similar thing, what's the difference between mentorship and sponsorship?
So I think of a sponsor as somebody who's going to campaign on your behalf, especially when you're not in the room, right? And they're really going to help push. So a mentor is somebody that is, it's a relationship of
Trust.
I hate to talk about it from like a hierarchy perspective, but it's like if you're a mentor, you're usually helping somebody and you're just feeding them the information down, right? But if you're sponsoring them, you're trying to feed that information up, right? You're trying to tell other people that are either at your level or higher up, like, hey, take a look at this woman. She's incredible. She did an amazing job. And that, I think as a manager, you have a degree and a responsibility of sponsorship in your role, right? But you don't have to be somebody's manager or even their mentor to sponsor them, to campaign on their behalf. If you see women in your company or minorities or any underrepresented group that you know is not getting the type of recognition that they deserve, speak up on their behalf, because you oftentimes have the mic or the spotlight if you're in a leadership role where these other people don't have the opportunity, right? And again, that's one of the things that I absolutely love about the company I work at. I think all of our managers and all of our leaders do a phenomenal job of sponsoring their employees and their teammates, and nobody's trying to take all the credit. Everybody's like, hey, I couldn't have done this without him and her, and it's amazing. But I think that that's the primary difference, right? Mentorship is you just usually a quiet one-on-one relationship. You and I are going to talk. I'm going to pass on my experience or give you some advice. And you're aware of those conversations. You're not always aware of the sponsorship somebody does for you.
Yeah, that is really true. Yeah, definitely. Some of the most pivotal moments in my career have been through sponsorship when I wasn't in the room. I went on a guy's podcast, lovely guy, Martin Teasdale, who runs a contact centre based community called Get Out of Rep. And we were having this conversation around, well, what does allyship and sponsorship really look like? And we gave an example of, maybe there's a project coming up. It's not a promotion, but it's a really great opportunity for someone in the team to get visibility more actively.
Yeah.
Think about who you automatically, your brain goes to, and then think about, but who else? So, being able to think about, I know that this incredible woman, she maybe hasn't had the chance to, do this. She's clearly highly talented and really high potential. Rather than giving it to the person we know we always default to, could there be somebody else who deserves that chance as well? But also more simple things as well, particularly for women around allyship and sponsorship. It could be being in a room and hearing a woman getting spoken over and being the sponsor in the room and saying, hey, what was that you just said, Claire? Or Dave, you just spoke over Claire. What were you saying? Just providing that opportunity and correcting other people's behaviour. I know I talked about this a lot recently, with it being recently International Women's Day. I was casting my mind back to examples of this that I thought about being sat in a room and not particularly confidently coming up with an idea that everybody just seemed to miss. And 10 minutes later, a guy next to me confidently said exactly the same thing I said and got a completely different response.
Yeah.
But somebody in the room going, but hang on a minute, that was Claire's idea. Like, to just be able to, be that advocate in the room.
Yes, that ally.
Or if, I don't know, you get asked to make the tea, somebody saying, hey, no, that's not her job. You go make it yourself. Smaller examples, obviously. So in terms of men holding the majority of senior leadership positions in many organisations, how can male allies play a more active role specifically in supporting women's career growth? Is there anything that we haven't already talked about that you'd like to add to that?
Not that we haven't already touched on. I think exactly what you said is the key, right? That they need to speak up when they witness, and it's oftentimes, in my experience, it's not blatant sexism. It's usually some unconscious bias. Yeah. And them saying, like you said, I had a coworker that had that exact same situation that you spoke about, that was like, she already said that, right? Like giving credit where credit is due.
Giving credit where credit's due, yeah.
And that's really important. I've been very fortunate. Like I said, when I was campaigning for the role that I have now, my biggest sponsor was a man. So we do need male allies. He was at the time he was a COO, and he was the one that was like, she deserves this job. She's qualified for it. She gets stuff done. She'll be amazing at it. I would not have gotten the role, I believe, if it weren't for his campaigning and his sponsorship. So I'm eternally grateful to him for that. But I also believe that communication is key. Like, we don't have control over the way the men in our company or our lives behave, right? But what we can control is the way that we communicate in those conversations that we have with them. And sometimes it's necessary to have those uncomfortable conversations. I'm a big believer that you catch more flies with honey than you do vinegar. So I try to not come at somebody in an attack mode, but to have a calm, respectful conversation. And I've been very fortunate that when I've had to have those conversations, they have gone over well. So one of the examples that I utilize a lot, and you kind of touched on this with the go make the tea, early on in my career at this organization, there was a male executive who oftentimes, whenever we were in a meeting, he'd say, Ann, take the notes. Never asked a single man sitting in that room to take the notes for the meeting.
Just the assumption, isn't it?
Yes. And it was so demeaning to me because I felt like he was treating me like I was his secretary. I was, again, an entry-level employee. It really bothered me. So one day I said to him, like, hey, are you aware that this comes across as incredibly sexist, right? Like, you don't ever ask the men in the room to take the notes. I feel like you're treating me like you're like I'm your secretary. And because you are in such a position of power, you are a very high level executive, I think that it's giving the impression to the other men in the room that I am a secretary and that they can ask me for these things too. And he was like, I am so sorry.
Shocked, I bet. Had no idea.
Yeah. And it was like, thank you for telling me that. I had no idea that's how it was coming across. He's like, honestly, Ann, the reason I ask you to take my notes is because you're an incredible note taker. And Claire, I did that to myself. I would, every meeting that I attended early on at this organization, I'm a diligent note taker because I always need it to reference back on. And like, to be a good employee, I was like communicating and sharing my notes with everybody who attended the meeting. Right. So he's like, he assumed, hey, if you're in the meeting, I'm assuming you're taking the notes anyway. So that's why I was just like, Ann, you'll take notes. All right, distribute them afterwards. I didn't realize that it was coming across like I was treating you like a secretary and how bad that looked. So he doesn't do it anymore. But I also had to learn the lesson of, you know what? Don't offer to make people tea, right? Like, go make myself a cup and sit down and start my work kind of thing. So here I thought I was being polite, but I was actually setting a bad example. But again, having to have that really candid conversation with somebody who was very several levels higher than me, and to say, like, I was nervous to have that conversation with him. I was afraid he was going to get angry and defensive, and I'm not sexist and I'm not treating you that way. Wasn't how he responded at all. It was like, I am so sorry. I had no idea that's how it was coming across. Thank you for telling me this. I had no idea you felt this uncomfortable around me for so long. All of those types of things.
Yeah, well, you gave him access to insight he didn't have about himself, which is a very valuable thing, isn't it? For any leader. I was just thinking maybe a slight extension of that. So I think what also male allies can demonstrate is actually listening and opening up space to have those kinds of conversations. So tell me about your experience of being a woman working in this environment or our team or this company, and creating that space and permission for those things to be raised, because it is a very difficult conversation to have. And unless invited, I don't know whether we would always be able to speak up, or it might turn into something much nastier, like an HR grievance type conversation. So I know this guy Martin Teasdale was saying he actively pursued those conversations and said, tell me about your experience as a woman working here, like, how is it? And he found out very much stuff. So just being open to learning about the lived experience of others, and maybe not just women but people different to you, can show you so much.
And they have to be willing to be vulnerable, like, even to be on the flip side of that. I had employee that was a minority, and when we started our employee resource groups, they tried to have one for minorities, and one of the HR folks came to me and said, can you go ask her why she didn't volunteer to be a part of this employee resource group? She's, one of our African American employees. We were hoping she would join because she's amazing. So I had to go have I had to be the vulnerable person to be like, hey, can I ask you why you didn't sign up to be in this employee resource group because you are a Black employee? And she said, yeah, I don't want to be the Black spokesperson for this company. And it was that, I never thought of it that way. I was like, thank you for being honest and for having that conversation. And I never thought of it that way either. And I've had, same thing, I had a gay coworker that she wouldn't sign up for. And she said the same thing. I don't want to be the spokesperson for all gay people at this company. That is a part of my identity. It is not my entire identity. And I don't want it to become that in this organization. So I don't want to be involved, and had to respect that. Right.
Yeah. I think when you've got employee resource groups that are really genuinely supported, that they are actually change agents, where they're given budgets to make the changes happen that they need to, or finance to be able to host events and actually do something with it.
Yeah,
that's great. But I think so many people are burnt by ERGs set up under poorly orchestrated, never really genuine in the first place DEI programs.
Yeah,
that actually are just a tick box exercise. And it certainly isn't anybody's job to educate the majority. Whatever marginalized minority group, including women. And I can imagine, like that automatic assumption is something that maybe
the way you combat that as an organization is, like, to your point, you prove that this is not just a lip service type group, right? We do want to be advocates for change here at this organization, but a lot of folks understandably are in a position where they're like the two employees I spoke to that said they didn't want to be the spokesperson people. They probably would have joined if down the road they saw that this resource group was actually making some changes. Right?
Yeah. Tell me about the changes you've already made, and then I'll think about whether or not I want to be a part of it. I know there's a friend of mine who's worked in a lot of big tech companies, and she's joined every single resource group around race and gender, and repeatedly had exactly the same experience. It was only skin deep. It wasn't real and genuine. And when there were real actions that needed to be taken, they'd report things up, and then nothing would change. Nothing would happen. So I think the shake-up of what's happening with not diversity, equity, and inclusion, but DEI programs in some cases is only taking away something that didn't help or made things worse anyway. But for companies who have established genuine cultural transformation for diversity, equity, and inclusion, I suppose they're probably still going to be all right? Because then they're not going to change who they are just because a policy doesn't exist. And I spoke to somebody the other day saying, we're one of the companies who has government contracts, and we had to publicly say we were rolling back on DEI because the threat was you're going to lose your government contracts. But we haven't actually done that around recruitment. We've still got an 8-stage process. It's still going to be completely anonymized. It's still going to be blah 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 blah. But being forced to kind of appear to be following the pressure,
the guidelines, but that you can't unlearn what you already know, right? So if you've already been exposed to all this information about groups that aren't fairly represented, like, to me, that's never going to go away. So maybe your company doesn't support you having some kind of a formal meeting around DEI. It doesn't mean that you guys can't meet over lunch and still talk about these things. One of the things I learned is if you want a better represented applicant pool, you want more women, you want more minorities, you want those people to start applying for your jobs, then go advertise in those, go to historically Black universities and post your roles, go to women, Sarah Lawrence, all of those types of organizations, and post jobs on their job boards. If that's the type of applicant pool that you want, if you work in HR and you have that ability and you're the one posting the jobs, you can still go after those applicant pools. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. So like I said, you don't need to unlearn what you've already learned.
Yeah, it just blows my mind though. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Actually, it still blows my mind though, because the data is there that proves the value of diverse teams on the outcomes businesses have: more profitable, better long-term performance, greater strategic objectives met both within the company and the impact that that company has. So we'll move on from that conversation now. You can tell I'm very passionate about it. Thank you for showing so many great examples. But before we go, I think, well, we haven't talked about the huge part of your experience and expertise and the conversations we're always having, where I consider you the subject matter expert when someone asks a question about employee experience, and I always come to you, don't I, Anne? So thinking about that direct collaboration between customer and employee experience. Now, we all know that employee experience are kind of two sides of the same coin, aren't they?
Absolutely.
But sometimes because of organizational structures, those departments might be kept quite separate. One might be sitting in HR, one might be sitting in marketing, and never the twain shall meet. So I suppose closing thoughts around this, how would you say these two departments, especially if they're sat far apart from one another, can collaborate better together to create better outcomes for all? And the answer might not necessarily be having the same direct reporting line. That may well not be possible and isn't possible for many. So I think that would just be some great advice you could share.
I think you're right. I think in most of the organizations I've worked in, they don't have the same reporting structure at all. So it's speak up, decide no matter which side you're on. So for instance, if you're on the customer side, if you are noticing like a trend or a drop in your customer satisfaction, don't forget, if you're going to go out and start compiling data and doing research and doing outreach to your customers, to also do that same outreach and compile data and information from your employees. Because like you said, it is two sides of the same coin, because a customer interaction occurs between your customer and your employee. So we are usually, as most organizations, phenomenal at collecting that data and that information from the customer mouthpiece. We're not always fantastic about collecting that information and that data from employees. And the reason that's so important is because there is that direct correlation between employee experience and customer experience. Meaning, if you have happy employees, you're going to have happy customers. And the same reverse is true. Right? I guarantee you, if you have unhappy customers, you can research that back and tie that back to, I've got some miserable employees, because as I mentioned before, we can only transmit what we've got. And if I'm miserable inside and coming and sitting at my desk every day, that's what I'm transmitting to the customers of yours that I'm interacting with. So always research both sides.
Yeah, totally agree. I would never do a discovery around customer experience without looking at voice of customer, voice of employee, and voice of stakeholder. And I call it like the holy trinity of research, to be able to do all three of those things. And when you're designing experiences, if there is an employee aspect, which invariably with customer contact there always is, no matter how much technology and digital we integrate into that, you have to be designing for the users as much as the employee users, as much as the custom ones as well. So I'm afraid we've run out of time. So to bring this one home then, if you had to pick one thing from our conversation today, what would your one big takeaway for the audience be?
The pay it forward, right? Especially if we're if any of us sit in any kind of a leadership position, like you said, reach down, hold that ladder down and help up the people below you. So be intentional, be vocal. Like, I'm willing to mentor, I'm willing to be here. And it doesn't even need to be a formalized mentor relationship. It could be, hey, if I have anything that you admire and you want some advice or just want to pick my brain, I'm here, reach out. And vice versa. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask those other women out there as well when you see something that you admire about them. The analogy I really like that a friend of mine uses is, if you go to the same well all the time to draw water, that well's going to run out of water. So all of us with that, our board of directors, or you said your advisory board, it's different wells. You're essentially going to all these different wells and you're drawing water from each well so that none of your wells dry out, but also so that you get a more well-rounded experience. So pay it forward and, draw from different wells.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today, Anne.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. I love this community. I'm the biggest fan. So anything I can do to support it, happy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And thank you to everybody who listened or watched wherever you are. And that's it for today. I really hope we see you again next time. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much to CoreMiner for sponsoring this episode of Wix Talk Trends. CoreMiner offers an AI-powered platform that allows organisations to analyse their customer conversations from both a CX and EX perspective in order to pull out actionable insights for better customer and employee experience. Thanks for listening to the Wix Talk Trends podcast with me, Claire Muscat. If you enjoyed the episode and you don't already, please do drop us a like and subscribe to our channel. The bigger the following, the bigger the impact we can create on our mission to amplify the voices of women working in CX and technology. Well, that's all for now. I'll see you again next time.